Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next edition where we present one of our ambassadors. Today, I'm being joined, and I'm hosting Wolfgang from Austria. And both in Austria and in Germany, it is super hot. So Wolfgang and I might come across as we're sweating. Doesn't mean that it's a heated conversation. It's going to be a very interesting one. I'm sure about that. But that is mostly due to the weather. So Wolfgang, welcome to the show, more or less. As with all other ambassadors, I want to put the focus on you. But first and foremost, a very, very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Sohrab. Glad to be here today, even with
Yeah.
warm weather outside. So, I mean, actually, I would prefer to be in the pool, but that's pretty okay to be here.
After the conversation. It's
After
time
the
boxed anyway, so not that long.
Yeah, no worries.
So, Wolfgang, as with all of our other ambassadors, I want to kick off with the question, where did your Agile journey start?
Yeah,
What was the context? What was your role back then? What were the challenges that you were facing with the team, etc.? Walk me through that.
that's a while ago, actually. My Agile journey started when the word Agile in this context didn't exist yet. So this was back in 1998. Well, this was the first time when I came in contact with extreme programming. So I worked for a company that provided billing systems for the telecommunications industry. Um, my role back then actually was something like a team lead for customer support, customers relationship management team. So we actually did support. So we had a third level hotline. So we were pretty much the technical support for everything. And my role was one. It was partly actually to be a support agent. So I was really sitting on the hotline and taking phone calls. But on the other hand, I was also team lead, and I also did some kind of coordination. And this was the first time when I, like that, came across extreme programming. So a colleague introduced me to that, and I was already interested in that because, I was still studying at this time. So telecommunications and informatics at the Technical University in Graz in my hometown. And project management was one of my major topics, my favorite topics. And we had in this organization, in this company, all the issues every company has, not enough quality, it takes too long, it costs too much, things like that. And I was just looking for something for alternatives to the traditional way of managing projects and so on. And this was the reason why I was interested in something like extreme programming. And 1 year later, I stumbled across Scrum. I mean, if you go back in time, 1999, there was no Scrum guide. There was no 1 million people talking about Scrum, no 1,500 books if you started at a bookstore looking for that and so on. There was nothing. There were just some guys from around the globe in some forums. We didn't have these chat rooms or whatever. It was the old technology, so according to the internet. And we started to exchange information. And in the year 2000, I started my first experiment. I didn't anybody tell I want to try Scrum, and I wouldn't call it Scrum nowadays anymore. It was something I believed Scrum could be. And I made all the mistakes you can make. So I started really with all the mistakes. This was my beginning. But anyway, we provided better results. We had more fun. We enjoyed working like that more and more. And this was the reason why I then later said, okay, is this something that makes sense in practice only, or can we also prove that it makes sense? And this was when I decided I want to go back to the university. I already finished my first studies and said, I want to do an PhD thesis about it. This was back in the year 2001. Yeah, Agile Manifesto 2001 and so on. I went to many universities and asked some professors, hey, I would want to write a PhD thesis about agility, organizational structure, stuff like that. And they all looked at me like I'm crazy. What am I talking about? What is this stuff? What does he mean? So they wanted me to join their teams, one option, or the other option would be to pay them for the support to be able to write the PhD thesis. And it took me 2 years to find a professor that I was able to start with the PhD thesis. Yeah, it was in 2003 when I enrolled then at the University of Klagenfurt, and they had their faculty was actually a combined faculty of economics and informatics, and that was a very good option because I had one professor for the economical part and the other professor for the informatics part, and this combination was really this was a good option for me, or the good starting point for me to write a PhD thesis about organizational structures, the relation between organizational structures, project management, and agile software development. And from then on, you know what happened.
I don't. So I'm
I
going to
don't.
be asking about this. But
Yeah.
first, man, I knew you had a PhD because I remember there was a Scrum gathering where you, myself, and I don't know who was the third person, and we joked that we were the only doctors in that context. I mean, you and the other guy were PhDs with, I think, computer science background, and I was the medical doctor in that context.
Yeah, exactly.
But I did not know that your PhD was about agility.
It was.
Now I'm curious, man. Walk me briefly. I know probably you can geek out on this, and probably both you and I can geek out on this together. But walk me briefly through what was the question you asked and what was the results that you got back then. And then maybe you can also use this as a segue to then say, to what extent were those theses that you wrote down back then turn out to be true or not as you look back on the past 20 years?
Yes. I mean, the research questions I had, I to be honest, I don't have them in my mind anymore. So it's too long ago. But in brief, it was something like, does it really make sense in this working in this way and so on? And what are the parameters, the criteria that it really can make sense, or are there some situations when it doesn't make any sense and so on? When it's better to rely on traditional approaches and so on, or in which situation is which approach the best approach for it?
Basically, the questions that all the clients ask us all the time, right?
Exactly, and I wanted to have this seen from an academic angle. I wanted to have proof, a scientific proof, that in this situation it makes sense, or in that situation it doesn't. So, and that's why I went to the university, and when I started, and it was not just only the agile approaches I analyzed, it was also the traditional ones, and I compared them. So, and I did. It was actually basically a meta study. What I did was taking, data from the company I worked for back then. So I asked all the project managers and coaches and whatever the role descriptions were, the names were. I asked whether I can take their project data and just extract it and do some analysis with it for my PhD thesis. And then I also searched where we can get other information like other studies and just combine all of that. So I did really a meta study. In total, it was a set of about 50,000 projects I analyzed with a lot of mathematics behind that. First of all, I thought, okay, let's build a neural network behind that. Let's do this, what we call nowadays artificial intelligence and all the kind of things. But I soon realized that's overpowered. We don't need that. So it was more a simple mathematics like a multivariate analysis and single and so on. Yeah, mathematics, a lot of mathematics. And what came out of this analysis was, so that's already the result, is yes, Scrum and all the other frameworks. So it was not just Scrum I analyzed, it was just one of them. Scrum and all the other frameworks, in certain situations, they really make sense. In other situations, don't do it. Yeah. So this was basically the result and all the criteria behind it and so on. So this was, what I tried to find out and what I did in the end.
Okay. Now, fast forward or briefly walk me through the past 20 years. So you started out with XP in 1998, 1999. You learned about Scrum. You implemented Scrum, although, as you mentioned, today you would not call it Scrum. You did back
Not at all. And even what I wrote in my PhD thesis about Scrum back then, I would just delete it and write it from scratch again.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case, right? We learn over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you learn about Scrum in more depth as you go. You ultimately become a certified Scrum trainer with the Scrum Alliance. Which year was that, Wolfgang? Just out of curiosity.
Certified Scrum Trainer was in 2019.
2019. Oh,
Yep.
but earlier you had other than certifications with them, probably, like
Yeah, the large scale as certified less trainer in
certified.
2017.
Okay, certified less trainer, right? Now you also and certified less trainer probably a good signal in terms of you were early on also interested in how do we scale this whole thing beyond one team. So
This was
walk
always
me,
very important for me. Yeah, I wanted always to have these more complex structures and so on. Yeah,
yeah, starting out with your PhD thesis, right, as you mentioned.
exactly.
Now walk me through like what were some of the most important learnings that you had as you went through these years, and what kind of passion did it trigger in you? So ultimately leading to where is your focus today?
I mean, what we, the the learnings. I mean, I had the honor to sit down with guys like Alistair Coburn over a beer and something like that. So when he came for the Agile Austria conference as one of the first keynote speakers and so on. And what I really enjoyed when talking to these people was not really more the facts and figures. It was more about how they came to the conclusions and so on. You see you know sometimes for most of people those guys were celebrities and still are, like famous people on TV and so on. They are different and so on, but if you sit together with them, you see they're human beings like you and me. Yeah, you can talk to them easily over a beer. It's fun. You have the same conversation as with a friend and so on. And all the stories, the background stories, gave me much more insight into why something is like it is, as it is, than all the books I read about it and so on. So when I heard about the Agile Manifesto, how they did it, how it went, and so on, about the skiing tours in between, etc., this is something that gives me the impression this is something vivid. This is not just theory. This is coming from guys with a practical background, and they face the same issues as we have. Were they convinced it's the right thing to do back then? I don't think so. So they still had these conflicts and different opinions about stuff and so on. And this is what Agile what we need to consider when we talk about agility. I mean, agility is not a recipe for something; it's what you make out of it, and that's what these guys did back then when they came with their lightweight methods and so on. They said, "Okay, I do it that way because." The other said, "I do it that way because." Is there a right or wrong? No, there's no right or wrong. So these are the learnings I had, and they were the most important ones for me. Which means, um, for me, it triggered the passion. Actually, I mean, the passion was there before. It didn't come over time. The passion was always I wanted to figure out how to improve organizational structures, the way of working in organizations,
Mhm.
but not by all means. And that's the very important part. Uh, Albert Einstein once said, make things as simple as possible, but not simpler. You know,
I
over
love that quote.
optimizing.
I love that quote.
Yeah, I hate over optimizing. 80% is good enough very often. 100% great, but you know, not everybody wants to be a player in a Champions League game. Not everybody wants to be a celebrity and so on. There are normal people out there. We need to consider that as well and take that in consideration. And when you talk to people like Alistair Coburn and the others and so on, that's the same for them. They are celebrities, but they are still human beings. They make mistakes. They have opinions. Are they correct all the time? No, they are not. Are they leaders? Yes. Are they idols? Yes. But still, we need to have our own opinions. Still, we need to make out of it what makes most sense for us. And that's exactly my passion. Actually, I want to help people. But if somebody tells me, okay, Scrum is nice, but it's not the right thing for us, okay, so be it. There are other ways. Maybe there are impulses you can take from Scrum or any other agile approaches. If they don't want to call it agile, also okay for me. Yeah. If they can improve something, if they can improve something with my help, I'm happy. That's my passion.
Yeah, I think you just laid out in your sentences also what we look for in our ambassadors. Number one, people who've been there, done that. People that have truly practical experience. People that have not been all of their life just advisors or consultants or coaches, whatever term you want to use, but people that have actually implemented that, and ideally people that continue to implement those things, right? And
Yeah,
I know, similar to myself, you run a business, right? So when you speak about leadership, you don't speak from a position of theory, you speak from a position of practice. I assume, or I remember, you and your team still build products, right?
absolutely.
Could be
Yeah.
software products, but definitely I know that you run an event once a year, right?
Mm,
That's a product as well. And
mm,
my guess is that you use at least some agile patterns as a team to make that product come to fruition, right?
absolutely.
That is, I think, really important. And I, similar to you, I admire the people that back then wrote the Agile Manifesto, because all of them, to my knowledge and to the extent that I got to meet them and get to know them, they were all practitioners,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Now, the second thing you mentioned was you want to help people. That's your passion. So if you're dogmatic about something, it's about the passion to help people, not dogmatic about a framework, be it Scrum, be it less, etc. All of those things are a collection of patterns that can help or not help, depending on the context that we're in. So identifying what is it that the client wants to solve as a problem, right? What is it that they want to optimize for, can allow us to identify, okay, which patterns from all the tools that we've collected and that we've implemented and that we have experience with, which one of these can make sense. Now, I want to go a bit deeper on the topic of organizational development, because in your PhD thesis already, and I assume back then, I mean, I was not around back then. It's not in the agile context, at least in like 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. But back then, I assume not that many people were talking about the topic of scaling. But you were already interested in that particular topic. So what triggered that interest in the topic of scaling, on the topic of organizational design?
Basically, my job. Because I was responsible actually when I started working on my PhD thesis. I think it was the same year. Oh, was it the same year when I moved to the USA? So I worked. I did my PhD thesis actually in my spare time. So I was full-time employed, and I spent 2 years in the USA almost on a project, and 2 years in Australia on in this time frame, and later on also in Germany sometime. And it was always um, an endeavor. All of these endeavors, they were relying on scale structures, what we call nowadays scale structures. So it means 120 people working on something, 400 people working on something on the same thing, and so on. So we needed that, and this
Mhm.
was just. It was not just my interest; it was my need. I needed it. And it was a good combination, theory and practice together. This was always my trigger point. Yeah. So this, and like said, in the USA, now actually in Australia, this is more what really made me think about going beyond just doing it, also teaching it later on, which happened. That was never a strategy for me actually, but in Australia, we replaced the system of a telecommunications provider. So in Germany, if you want to replace the system of O2, or in Austria of Telekom in Austria, and so on, the third biggest telecommunications provider in Australia. And this is a huge endeavor. That means not just replacing the system, that means also doing all the organizational change besides it in parallel. And like I said, this was part of my job, actually, all of that,
So out of necessity, right?
all of necessity. Yeah.
Now earlier, um,
Not only out of necessity. Yeah.
not also out of curiosity, right?
Also, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I want to go a bit deeper into the topic of scaling, because what I fundamentally believe is that every single one of our ambassadors has like their I mean, most of them are incredible generalists, but then also, similar to T-shaped team members, have one area where they are incredibly strong, right? I refer to that as their superpower, and probably scaling could be your superpower connected to the topic of organizational design, right? Now, my question, you mentioned earlier lightweight frameworks. In the context of scaling, we have lightweight and not so lightweight frameworks.
Mm,
And I don't want to, use this as an opportunity to start bashing SAFe or whatever. I'm really curious about your experience in that particular context. And how do you look at the various scaling frameworks that are out there? Where do you see strengths and weaknesses of each of them?
Well, some of them are a huge step for an organization. So if you want to implement or use such a framework as the blueprint for your organization, which takes a lot of change and maybe years of change, that's probably for some organizations, for some companies, just too much for the beginning. So some of those which are called prescriptive and you could just replace the names and do the same thing and so on, they also make sense. I mean, if you don't abuse it. I mean, if you just replace names with something else, that's not a change. There's always change. There should always be a change involved, because it's also an Einstein quote. The purest form of weirdness or craziness is changing nothing and hoping for other results. So yeah, doesn't work. We all know that. So even if there is something which, let's call it SAFe. I mean, the criticism is all about SAFe, that it doesn't change anything and they can do the same things with just different labels. True, but that's not changing like that. If you use SAFe as the first step towards improvement, it does totally make sense for me. If you want to start, for example, with a framework like LESS, which requires a lot of organizational change and a huge mindset change, like that, people can be easily overwhelmed by doing that. Yeah, it's probably not the first step. Maybe I've seen organizations starting with SAFe and going towards LESS later on, which is probably the right development for this organization. And is this a strength or a weakness? I don't know. I'm just saying it could be like that, starting with one and then the other. Because when this is good enough for the first step, do it. If it's not good enough anymore for the third step, then switch to another one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. I like the way you put this, because early on, I mean, I was never that deep into, or initially I was not that deep into the scaling things. I was so much more interested in product development per se, and taking it across different industries. So from software to hardware to pharmaceuticals, biochemicals, etc. But eventually, the moment you start to work with leaders, you also have to think about organizational design, because that's the one question they have on their mind. And
Absolutely.
then I did a SAFe course, and it was a brilliant instructor. And I remember I was thinking, I was like, yeah, I do not agree with everything that they have, especially if you look at the full scale SAFe configuration. But I can see that SAFe, and the term that I used would be an excellent Trojan horse to get agility into an organization, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Correct.
Because as you mentioned, right, the more lightweight a framework is for a very hierarchical and very structured organization, moving to something that is lightweight could be too big of a gap, right? It would not be the valid next step, something that they can also imagine, right? But then starting with SAFe, initially you relabel certain things, but you also implement smaller changes like continuous improvement cycles, etc. You might move, and I've actually seen this happen, towards something that is more lightweight. Or you're like, hey, this is good enough. As you pointed out,
Absolutely.
why now bother about something being more lightweight out there just because of dogma, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for some people, such a journey would sound like we need to move to the moon or something like that, which sounds impossible for most people. Uh, the first step could be, yes, let's move to the neighbor country. So that's easier. Yeah, you can imagine how to do it. You can come up with a plan for that. But moving to the moon, I don't know.
Exactly.
Later, man.
And maybe it's not even needed, depending on the problems that you're facing, right? And the things that you want to optimize for. So, in addition to scaling, Wolfgang, where would you see other superpowers of yours? And I know it's difficult to talk about oneself, but I'm asking you.
Absolutely. You mean besides singing? No.
It's not saying, yeah, I saw that actually.
No, forget it. I'm just joking. No, that's one of my hobbies. Yeah. Superpowers, actually, I think scaling is really important for me, always was organizational design for large organizations and companies. But besides that, and that's probably the surprise for all these agile purists, it's project management.
That comes as a surprise. It comes as a surprise. Now, I'm curious. Walk me through that.
Now, before I came across extreme programming, Scrum, etc., I was also very much involved in traditional project management, but I never did it this extreme, command and control way. I always looked for a more um, servicing way of doing that. So this servant leadership kind of approach and so on, or influential leadership, whatever it's called nowadays. This was always part of how I wanted to do it. And I read really, really good books before the Agile Age, which addressed all these topics, which were named Agile something later on. Yeah. And I still believe, even if you're talking about product life cycles and product management and Scrum is only for product development and not for projects and so on, I think this is incorrect, because still in most companies, wherever I go, there are projects. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
a project is nothing bad. The abusage of it is something bad. Yeah. And if we consider, for example, a project as a container for boundaries like budget, time frames, and so on, it totally makes sense to me still. Yeah. For how to coordinate something, how to and so on. Uh, um, but um, we and if you combine that with the agile mindset, and it means product lifecycle. So if you have multiple project life cycles within one product lifecycle, it still makes sense to me. It's just a division of the work. And we always say, let's do smaller chunks. Product lifecycle is huge. That's too big.
It's like
That's
going to
the
the
big
moon.
picture. Yeah, exactly. That's the big picture. But if we cut that down into smaller chunks like little projects, but in a continuous way, you can grasp it easier. You can still manage it easier. You know better how to lead through that and so on. So this is my approach to project management in an agile way.
Yeah. And I fully agree with you. So number one, in every company that I go at a certain size, there are projects. Number two, you can apply agility or let's say the practices that we, for example, connect with agility, right? Within Scrum as an example, you can apply them in any project, right?
Absolutely.
Now, when does it make a lot of sense? Going back to your PhD CSAT, when there's a lot of uncertainty. If there's not a lot of uncertainty, you don't need that feedback loop,
Go
right?
straightforward.
But if there isn't a lot of uncertainty, you can still have a project, and then you apply those feedback loops. And will the project be done better? Of course, it will be better. So
Absolutely.
I fully agree with you on that. Now, do you also happen then to work with a lot of people that have been trained in a traditional sense with
Yeah,
regards to project management, and now
absolutely.
give them that agile tool set, collection of patterns and proven practices?
Uh, and I always try to start where they are and not where I am, because, the agile world, if you're in the agile world for 25 years and more now, you're somewhere else, but you still need to understand where those people are and where they come from. And if they have worked in a hierarchical organization with command and control structures and so on, they're the starting point, right? And you need to gently move them towards something else, whatever it is in the end. Like I said, if they call it agile, call it agile. If they call it something else, it's okay. If they want the flexibility to react on changes on the market and the market and so on, then that's the goal we need to reach. How we will reach it, I don't know yet. I need to figure that out with them together. I never ever went to a company and said, you need to do Scrum for that. I never ever said that. If they figured out, I taught them what Scrum might be. And if they thought, okay, that's a great approach and we can do it, then let's do it. Yeah. But I never said, do it that way exactly.
You know what?
However, I need to relate it a little bit. Sorry. Uh,
Go ahead.
I always try to be a coach and a consultant at the same time. I never only asked questions and said to people, you need to come up with that. Because if they're not capable of doing that yet, then I taught them how to do it. Yeah. I created a blueprint or something like that, or I showed them how I would do it, and they can follow me, they can follow my approach or not. So I always was the coach plus consultant. Yeah.
That's why you're one of our ambassadors. Now, what I wanted to close with, Wolfgang, as we're at the end of our time box,
Yes.
you just laid out in one sentence what for me customer centricity means. You don't start where you are, you start where they are.
Mm.
You put their perspective first. And it's not about you wanting to achieve something, it's about you wanting to help them so that they can achieve something. And with that said, Wolfgang, thanks for taking the time. I'm really glad, super happy to have you as our very first Austrian ambassador.
Yeah.
Hopefully, there will be more to come, including people from your team. And yes, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.